challenges like market volatility, inflation, and retirement income. Pankin Financial Perspective is here to help by addressing common financial concerns, sharing valuable strategies, and exploring ways you can work toward your financial goals. Now let's get started with Pankin Financial Perspective.
If you'd like more information about what you hear during our show today, give us a call at 952-873-2703 or visit us online at pankinfinancial.com. That's PANKONIN financial.com. And while at my website, click on the radio page to check out past shows and to subscribe to our program on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or Amazon Music. Also, while at my page, click the link at the top to get the latest retirement guide. You know, every year brings its own set of financial headlines, but this one has really packed a punch. We've had tariffs making waves, inflation pushing higher, and plenty of ups and downs in the stock market. And that's just in 1 year. For a lot of people who are nearing retirement or already living in it, that kind of environment naturally makes you want to take a more conservative approach with your investments. And honestly, it makes sense. Your savings may need to support you for decades, and you've spent a lifetime building that nest egg. Wanting to protect it isn't just reasonable, it's human. That's exactly why we see so many conservative portfolio strategies out there, like the classic 40% stocks and 60% fixed income mix. It's also a big part of why annuity sales have surged, nearly $120 billion in the third quarter alone. At the end of the day, most folks share the same concerns. They don't want to outlive their money, and they don't want to lie awake at night worrying about every twist and turn in the stock market. And to help me break down some of this today, I'm bringing in my co-host, Tony Shore, who's truly the only person I know who can stay upbeat even when the market throws us curveballs.
Well, it's as of the recording of the show, it's pretty easy to be upbeat.
Yes,
the market, I just glanced over at CNBC, the stock ticker, and the headline said both the Dow and the S&P hit record highs today. That just means there's going to be a bigger correction later on, the way I view it. But it's good. It's good to hit those highs. We got to get those gains. And I know you work hard with your clients to come up with a plan not to chase that. You can't time the market, but you want some money and growth. Times like this, we've had some pretty good gains. But I do want to talk about, Ashton, how you I want to let people know that your name in Poland, it actually comes from Pankoni, which means a man who owns a lot of horses, or the horseman.
Yes.
Did you know that?
We did. Yeah. It's one of, we look that up every once in a while, and I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah. I wanted to share with our listeners and viewers out there.
I feel like I've fallen away from my ancestors. I don't have any horses, so I kind of feel like I'm not living up to my namesake.
You're not living up to your name. I always thought it was Polish for pancake, but that would be a little better. I can handle that. It's not bad though. The Mr. Horse or the Horseman. Another way to say that was Pankoni or Pankin. Yeah. My mom owned 3 or 4 horses when we were growing up. She was a horse person, that's for sure. So
we never had any. We did have a horse pasture that we rented out to somebody else to use, but never owned any horses.
So there were horses there on your property?
Yes, there were.
Okay. Well,
so kept a little bit of the name.
Yeah. Good. I just thought, since you spell it out for our listeners, they should know. I thought that would be good. But you've got a great topic lined up for us today. And, you're right. Volatility, it can shake people's confidence, but the markets go up and down. And luckily, over the last 100 years, they primarily have been up. Yep. And that's why, though, these conversations matter, because if the timing hits at a bad time, like if you retire next year and the markets, it's a down year for the markets, what do? There are ways to plan for that, though.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. And again, during the show today, Tony, we're going to take a look at many factors, and we're going to use a Kiplinger article, Why Playing It Safe in Retirement is a Big Risk.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about the other side of being cautious, because, well, conservative strategies can absolutely increase somebody's financial confidence, especially if you're retired. That safety can come with a price as well, right?
Yeah, it does, Tony. This can be a big surprise to a lot of people. Being too conservative may actually cause more harm than good, even when the market feels rocky. We've seen it play out over and over. Think back to the 2008 Great Recession, the early days of the 2020 COVID pandemic, or the bear market in 2022. A lot of investors panicked, moving everything to cash, and then missed out on recoveries and the bull runs that followed.
And stepping out of the market at the wrong moment can make it really hard to catch back up, can it?
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just about missing returns. For retirees especially, there's another risk. If your investments become too conservative, they might not keep up with inflation. And when that happens, you increase your chances of outliving your money, and something no one wants to have to face.
Yeah, I mean, for those who, think I'll keep it under the mattress, right?
Yeah.
Keep all my money under the mattress, and we've talked about this on shows. I know you've run across people who have all of their retirement savings in a non-interest bearing checking account.
Yeah, checking your savings account. Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's a lot there that left to be desired, because inflation will kill you at that point. And we've seen that happen. I think sometimes people don't even realize that their portfolio can drift that way, right?
Yeah, and it's a common situation, Tony. A lot of people set up their asset allocation once and then they never revisit it. Maybe everything is inside of a 401k, or they just haven't worked with a financial service professional or financial advisor before. And so over time, without even noticing, a portfolio can slide into a much more conservative position than someone ever intended. And even looking back at those 401ks, very common inside of those 401ks is target date funds. In 2000, you might have said, hey, I'm going to retire in 2025. All of a sudden you get to 2025 and you're not retired yet. You're going to work another 5 years. And now that portfolio is ultra conservative. And so you just want to make sure you visit that and review it to make sure it's working hard for you.
In other words, if at some point, your target date could move, and if you have a feeling it's headed that way, you're going to want to sit down with your financial advisor, which everyone should have, a trusted financial professional like yourself, Ashton. I think that's good. But again, like the 401k or those things, the silver lining here is that it isn't something people are stuck with forever.
Yeah, Tony, there are clear signs that retirement portfolio has gotten too conservative. And even better, there are strategies that we can adjust to help that. So in today's shows, we're going to walk through what those signs look like and what steps you can take if you recognize them in your own plan.
Okay. So let's start with one of the biggest surprises, I think, for a lot of retirees, which is that big cash pile that people think is safe.
Yeah, this is a tough one because, having some cash absolutely makes sense, but too much of it, that can actually be a problem. Cash is often not king in retirement the way many people assume. So when someone is holding a large chunk of money on the sidelines, which is like what we might call dry powder, that's often a big red flag.
And by cash, we don't necessarily mean wads of hundreds on a mattress. We might mean it can be in a bank, but just something that doesn't have a good growth to it. If it's earning 1% or less than the rate of inflation, or it's liquid and it's not earning a lot of interest or any interest, that's not good. That's what you call dry powder. You do need some of that in an emergency fund, but a lot of people, like I said, have too much. I remember hearing about a lady recently who came in and had $700,000 in her checking account.
Yeah.
And that's, the compounding interest she was missing out on. It staggers the mind, especially look at the last few years, look at the last 20 years. And she just had it in there. The growth would have been huge. So, that's good. Now, a lot of people are doing that, right? Just waiting for the right moment to maybe get back into the market because they jumped out maybe last April when it went down.
Yeah, I think that's right. I hear it all the time. I'm waiting for the tariffs to be resolved, or I'll jump back in when things settle down. But here's the thing. Returns don't come from avoiding volatility. They come from managing through it. So, sitting in cash might feel safe, but over time, you might miss out on growth that helps support your retirement.
Yeah, and the market doesn't exactly send out a memo letting you know when the perfect moment has arrived either.
No, I agree. The article suggests that investors are often better buying when a stock is down and holding it for the long term. Even in retirement, you still have years ahead of you, and those years are where those investments can recover and grow. So again, you turn 65, you retire. It doesn't mean we stick it all under the mattress. We hopefully want to live a long, healthy 30 years in retirement, and we need that money to continue to grow.
Yeah, and long term, the idea isn't to avoid ups and downs, but to have a strategy that can actually weather them, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good perspective. Cash has a role, but too much of it can quietly undermine your long-term goals.
Okay. Another challenge, I think, for overly conservative investors is missing out on the market's strongest days. And those can really matter, right?
Yeah, they can. Over the past 3 years, the S&P 500, the NASDAQ, and the Dow have all hit record highs. As you said today, it's a record high, and it's shaping up to be another good year ahead. And so we're seeing a lot of strength in the markets. And that's great news for stock investors, but for people who have shifted heavily into cash, bonds, treasuries, or CDs, which all have had lower returns, that upside can be easy to miss.
Oh, for sure. And the long-term difference can be pretty eye-opening, can it?
It really can. The article gives a great example here, Tony. It's let's say someone invested $100,000 over the past 20 years, ending in the year 2024. If that money was in bonds, that $100,000 would have grown to $185,000. But if it was in large cap core stocks, it would have grown to roughly about $844,000.
Oh,
so yeah, that's over a $650,000 difference. Huge gap, same money, same time period, but very different outcomes.
That's the part that probably surprises a lot of people, or should. I mean, the risk of being too conservative doesn't always feel like risk. It feels like safety until you see what you've missed out on, right?
Yeah, bingo, Tony. Opportunity cost is one of those things we talk about there. And, and this is where diversification becomes so important. You want to mix assets that don't all behave the same way at the same time. So it's kind of like planting a garden. You don't want everything to bloom on the same day and then fade on the same day. With investing, you want different asset classes doing different things. So you're not relying on one single area for all your growth or all your stability.
So what you're saying there is that a healthier mix may give you a healthier long-term picture.
Yeah, correct, Tony. It's about balance, not about extremes.
So let's bring inflation into the picture. We have to talk about it. Inflation, we mentioned it earlier in the show. It's the silent killer that hasn't been so silent lately. Everybody's talking about it. It can reshape somebody's entire retirement without them maybe even noticing, right?
Yeah, inflation is one of the clearest signs a portfolio may be too conservative. If inflation is running at 3% and your investments aren't keeping pace with that, that's a major red flag. So again, the article points out that if nothing changes, whether your lifestyle or your asset allocation, you're setting yourself up for the possibility of running out of money in retirement because of that inflation.
Right. And when you look at the math, it really puts things into perspective.
Yeah, it does.
Right?
Yeah. Again, it puts things into perspective. Again, let's look at that same example. If you start with $100,000, inflation sits at 3%. After 25 years, that same 100,000 only buys about $47,000 worth of goods and services.
Wow.
So you've lost more than half of your purchasing power. So, I get the argument a lot. Well, I'm not losing in that CD or savings in the bank at 0 or 3%. I'm not losing my money. But again, you are to inflation.
That's huge. And that's just at 3%.
Yeah, you're right. Now think about periods like we mentioned following the pandemic when inflation hit around 8%. That's in that environment, the same time horizon, you'd lose about 85% of your purchasing power over that 25 years. So that's kind of erosion that can make an even well-planned retirement start to feel very uncertain.
So staying too safe may actually put somebody in a much riskier position than they realize is what all this is leading to, correct?
Yeah, that's the key point. Protecting your money doesn't just mean avoiding volatility. It also means giving your investments a chance to grow enough to keep up with rising costs over time.
Yeah. So before we continue today, Ashton, let our listeners out there know how they can schedule a complimentary consultation to get a solid plan in place or make sure that their portfolios and their money is well balanced, enough in safety and low risk and enough at risk to earn something.
Yeah, best way is just to give our office a call, 952-873-2703. Again, that number is 952-873-2703. Visit us online, pankinfinancial.com. That's PANKONIN financial.com. And again, scheduling a consultation only takes a few minutes, and we're always happy to work around your schedule.
That's great. Yeah, I encourage our listeners out there to pick up the phone, give you a call, or go online there and set up that consultation. It's no charge, no obligation consultation. And now that you've walked us through the signs of being too conservative with our finances, the natural next question, I think, is what do you do with this information? What can our listeners do with that?
Understanding that you may have been planning it or playing it a little too safe is an important first step, but simply recognizing that isn't enough. If you want your retirement strategy to stay healthy, you may need to take awareness and turn it into action.
Yeah, and I feel this is the part that can be a little intimidating for people out there, knowing something needs to change, but not quite knowing what to adjust.
Yeah, and again, that's completely normal. The good news is there's several practical options to help realign your portfolio. And the other thing is people think we have to go from one end of the pool all the way to the other, just from the shallow end to the deep end. And again, usually it's going to be somewhere in the middle there. So we're going to have a little bit in the conservative and a little bit in the growth there. And so it doesn't require those extreme steps. You just want your thoughtful adjustments that can be better to support your long-term goals.
Yeah. Okay. So let's walk through some of these options and break down how each one works.
Yeah, you got it, Tony. We'll look at a few strategies that can bring your portfolio back into balance without abandoning that sense of security people value.
Well, and okay, so the first strategy, because I think it's one a lot of people have heard but aren't always sure how to apply, and that's diversification.
Yeah. And again, that's a great idea. The best way to avoid being overly conservative is to make sure your investments are truly diversified. And the only way to know that is by taking time to review your overall portfolio. And again, when we sit down, we do a comprehensive look at all assets, not just retirement assets, to have a full understanding. And then again, end of the year, the beginning of the year is a great moment to do that kind of check-in.
And I think most people you probably talk to think that, oh, yeah, I'm diversified. Yep. I've got a 401k and my money's well diversified within that 401k. But is it? Or their IRA or what have you? And typically it's not. Don't you find that most people who come in who feel they are diversified typically are not truly, you use the word truly diversified.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah. And so one of the biggest things I see when I look at somebody's 401k, the number of people I've seen in the stable value fund, it's unreal. And it sounds great. Stable, it provides value.
What more could you want?
Yeah. What more could you want? Well, what it is actually a money market account earning probably less than 1%. And so again, if this is your long-term retirement money, we hopefully are going to shoot for a little better return than that.
Yeah, a lot of people get fooled by that. It's just a money market account, and they're really not making that much money.
Yeah.
So that's where you come in, right? You need that look at that maintenance, right? At the beginning of the year, a lot of people do it at the end of the year, but now beginning of New Year is probably a good time to look at that and have somebody check it for you, right?
Yeah, and that's a great way to put it. And if you've never worked with a financial service professional or financial advisor, this might be the time to consider it. Yes, there is cost involved, but if it can help prevent you from drifting into overly conservative portfolio, it may be very well worth it. There's a lot of value added sitting down with a professional.
Yeah, because when your portfolio isn't diversified, there are usually clues, like you say, but people just don't always know what to look for.
Yeah, and I really think you're onto something there, Tony. The article highlights several signs that your portfolio may not be as diversified as you think. And so here's some potential examples. Your investments might be concentrated in fewer than 10 individual stocks. Or, your asset allocation could be heavily tilted in one direction, like bonds, for instance. Another sign is when your portfolio reacts dramatically to a single piece of news, something like NVIDIA missing earnings causes your entire portfolio to tank. That could be a red flag as well. You might also have funds that overlap, meaning, that you may own a lot of the same holdings inside of that portfolio. Or maybe there's no international exposure at all. So it's important to have some domestic and international exposure. And again, sometimes everything is just clustered into one sector or one industry.
And even when a portfolio may look diversified on paper, those kind of patterns can reveal the opposite, right?
Yeah. And again, collect your blue ribbon, because diversification really is about what you're making sure your money isn't all moving in the same direction for the same reason.
Right.
So again, you want to spread it out between sectors, not just at different companies. And when you spread it out thoughtfully, you're in a much better position to weather different market environments. So again, diversification doesn't eliminate all risk in a portfolio, but it does help reduce risk.
Yeah. Okay. And I wanted to ask you about another strategy that helps people stay invested without feeling like they're taking on too much risk or more risk than they're comfortable. And that's building a kind of cash safety floor. We talked about too much cash, but that's a possibility too, right?
Yeah. And again, one of the best ways to boost confidence in retirement while still keeping your money working for you is to put in a withdrawal strategy that satisfies some of those essential needs. So again, if you want to make sure you're going to have enough to spend on the essentials, takes into account things like inflation, longevity, and ideally any unexpected healthcare expenses. And then we also look at tax consequences of these withdrawal strategies as well.
Yeah, having a withdrawal strategy in retirement is a huge part of the plan and a retirement income plan. And if you go into retirement without one, without working with somebody like yourself who's laid out an actual written plan, you have a retirement income plan, that can be really costly. And ultimately, I think the goal is to make sure your essential expenses are covered and then let everything else stay invested, correct?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. You know, you can cover what you need first and leave the rest alone so it can continue to grow and compound. One option the article highlights is something called flooring, which is an approach where you create your secure, guaranteed base of income that covers your monthly expenses like housing, healthcare, insurance, transportation, food, etc. And so that once that foundation is in place, the remaining money can stay invested and work and compound for you.
Yeah, and that foundation really becomes an emotional buffer, doesn't it? I mean, knowing your basics are secure takes away so much of the stress and makes it easier to handle whatever the markets decide to do.
Yeah, you nailed it, Tony. You know, once you understand what your essential expenses are, and you already have that coming in, and whether that's Social Security, sometimes we give it in guaranteed income streams like annuities. You know, many people feel more comfortable letting the rest of the money be exposed to a little more market risk. And so that way you might get that security and growth potential without feeling like you're gambling with your lifestyle.
Good point. Another strategy people can sometimes hear about, maybe without fully understanding it, is the bucket approach. And I think we've maybe even mentioned it on the previous shows. You've brought that up. The bucket approach can be an effective way to stay invested without feeling as overwhelmed by market swings, right?
Yeah, I agree with you there, Tony. The bucket approach is another way to help future-proof your money by segmenting your retirement savings into 3 categories. You want to look at that short term, less than 5 years, medium term, that 5 to 10 year, and then long term, 10 plus years, 10 to 30 years. You know, and each bucket has a specific job, and together they help you balance stability with growth.
So it's really about allocating money for when you need it. So let's break those down, starting with that short-term bucket. Yeah,
the short-term bucket is all about covering your needs in the first 1 to 5 years of retirement. So this money you may plan to spend right away, so it's positioned to be readily available and not dependent on what the market is doing at the moment.
Okay, makes sense. What about the medium-term bucket? That kicks in after that, right?
Yeah, the medium-term bucket is designed to provide stable growth stream of income that can keep up with inflation and then refill that short-term bucket as needed. So this covers roughly 5 to 10 years of retirement, or years 5 through 10, I guess. And then the investments tend to be a little less risky.
Sure, they can still have some growth and be at risk, but not as risky. So it acts as the bridge between short-term and long-term because it's steady but not overly conservative.
Yeah, right again, Tony. And then you have the long-term bucket, which is focused on growth during years 10 through 30. Because this money isn't needed immediately, it can be invested a little more aggressively, typically in the stock market. And again, over time, that's where you're going to get the potential for real compounding interest.
And I'm sure a lot of people actually find that structure really helpful.
Yeah, they do. Bucketing or time segmentation can give people a sense of clarity. They know which dollars are for today, which ones are for tomorrow, and which are for more further down the road. That alone can make staying invested feel much more manageable.
Sure. Okay, so we've talked about the signs and we've talked about some of the strategies, but the big question out there that a lot of listeners have is when to start making changes, because taking risks with your life savings can be overwhelming.
Yeah, and that's totally and completely understandable. Taking on even a little more risk can be scary, especially when you've worked so hard to build what you have. But the good news is, getting slightly less conservative may be easier than people expect. You don't have to overhaul everything overnight. Baby steps are absolutely okay. And again, as we talked before, Tony, it's not all of a sudden you're in the shallow end of the pool and diving everything into that deep end.
Sure.
It's going to be a diversified strategy there.
Sure. I love that, Baby Steps. It reminds me of that Bill Murray movie. What was it? What About Bob? Do you remember that movie?
No,
What
that's
About
before
Bob?
my time, probably.
Oh, that was not before your time. What About Bob? I'm not that much older. Okay. What About Bob was a great movie, and it was Baby Steps was the name of a psychological book that the main character, Bill Murray, relied on. So I always think of that movie. I'm a huge Bill Murray fan. You got to watch that movie. What About Bob? Richard Dreyfuss and Bill Murray. What more?
Sounds good. Yeah.
It is a great, very funny, but it's true, right? Taking baby steps, it makes it much more approachable.
Yeah. And again, that's the idea. A baby step might simply mean committing to, look over your portfolio this month and then maybe making a small shift in your asset allocation next month. These gradual changes can be enough to start realigning things without feeling like you're just jumping into the unknown.
Yeah, I think that's true. And just understanding the why behind the shift can give people confidence to take that first step.
Yeah, that's it. Sometimes just realizing that you've become too conservative and understanding the implications of staying that way is enough to help you make a calculated move when you feel ready. There's no perfect timeline. The best time to start is when you're comfortable and informed about that decision.
Yeah. Wow. I think this was a fantastic show, a great topic today, Ashton. A really good information. Is there anything else you want to add before we wrap it up today?
Again, if you have questions about retirement and your financial strategy, visit my website, pankoninfinancial.com. That's PANKONIN financial.com. Give us a call, 952-873-2703. Again, that's 952-873-2703. We'd love to help you protect your savings and feel confident about the road ahead.
All right. Sounds good. And that does it for today's episode of the Pankonin Financial Perspective with our host, Ashton Pankonin.
Thank you for joining us for Pankonin Financial Perspective. Don't head into retirement without a plan for both your finances and your health. For more information, contact Ashton Pankonin at Pankonin Financial Group at 952-873-2703 or visit PankoninFinancialGroup.com. Join us again soon for another episode of Pankonin Financial Perspective. Advisory services are offered by Ashton Pankonin LLC DBA Pankonin Financial Group, an investment advisor in the state of Minnesota.
All matters discussed during the show are for informational purposes only. Each individual situation may vary, and the opinions expressed here may not apply to everyone. Materials presented are believed to be from reliable sources, and no representations can be made as to its accuracy. All ideas and information should be discussed in detail with one of our qualified representatives prior to implementation. We are not affiliated with or endorsed by the Social Security Administration, the Federal Medicare Program, or any other government agency. Calling this number will direct you to a licensed sales agent.